Welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, the go-to construction podcast for construction professionals seeking inspiration, education, or motivation for the next steps in their career. Each Monday, you'll be joined by me, Mick Donaghy, Managing Director of Gedden Executive Recruitment and a respected name from the industry. A construction leader, a business owner, or someone in the thick of the action. The whole premise of this podcast is for you to get something from it. An idea, a connection, a mentor, whatever it is, I hope you get it. And I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Mentioned that, I was young, I was, fit, liked physical stuff and loved the outdoors, loved building and that whole thing that I'd become experienced with. Ended up doing my apprenticeship in carpentry. Loved that, absolutely loved it. I mainly worked in civil construction, funnily enough, as an apprentice carpenter. Then did my, what was back then called the Building Foreman Clerk of Works course, and then a building certificate, sort of like an associate diploma or something now. Then had a career in construction, worked my way up from swinging a hammer, foreman, site manager, project manager, and then got to the point after 20 years where I just wanted a career in construction. And one of my former bosses, who told me I'd never amount to anything because I didn't have a degree, actually rang me and said, "Mate, I've got this development role for you." And I'm just going, "Mate, I'm not interested in development." And he ultimately said, "Mate, think of it this way. Same money, you don't have to work Saturday. Come in late. 7:30 in the morning, arriving at work. I tell you, that was gold." Right?
Yeah.
And, my wife and I had at that point in time, we had two kids. One brand new one and one was 2 years of age, and I swore to my wife that when we had kids I wasn't going to work the stupid hours, and I was. You can't not work the stupid hours in the construction industry. Mm-hmm. So when he said you don't have to work Saturday, come in later, just get the job done, I just said, you know what, I'll give it a go. And so, I took on this role as a development manager, and, I found out that development was natural for me, because when I was a teenager, being surrounded by Dad with his joint ventures and things like that.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of The Takeoff. Today on The Takeoff podcast, I am joined by Steve Chandler. Steve is the founder of Lefter Corporation, a property development consultancy focused on advising corporation, government and high net worth individuals on strategies related to their respective property holdings. Property and construction has been long embedded into Steve's DNA. A third-generation property developer, Steve has spent more than 40 years honing his skills in the property and construction sector throughout Australia. Working his way up from an apprentice background through to foreman to project manager, right through to development manager, Steve knows a thing or two about the industry. Now an author and director of the Property Development Institute, Steve is here today to discuss his story, background, and a bit more about the market in today's terms. Steve, thank you for being a guest on Takeoff.
Mate, pleasure to be here, Mick. Absolute pleasure.
Steve, do you mind giving us a bit of an introduction to who you are, what you do on a day-to-day basis? I never feel like I can do it justice with an intro.
I suppose day to day, if you look at my current world, I've got a 40-unit development that we're just doing the initial due diligence on, and we're going to commit to that in the next couple of weeks, I would suggest. So that'll get me started on, right from the very outset of a 40 odd unit development. I'm running you mentioned Property Development Institute. So, that's a training organisation for individuals. Currently actually going through and creating new courses and new course content for that. So on a daily basis, I'm working on that and talking to people about who want to be developers. And then in my consultancy business, we're doing we're superintendent for a $100+ million project out at in Western Sydney, working with Blue Scope Steel, and their project's worth in excess of $400 million. So we're a superintendent on that, plus a sort of like a commercial advisor, if you like, as well.
Awesome, Steve. No, it's really interesting. What I'm really interested in doing is unpacking that how you got to this level. Obviously, you've got your finger on the pulse in many different sort of aspects. From I've seen that you're guest lecturer. You also write through to the writing books. The development, the consultancy. So, talk me through how you got involved in construction initially.
Yeah,
Well, I want to hear that story.
yeah. Well, if let's go back 2 generations. We'll start early. Look, my grandfather was a what I call a subsistence developer. He he used to develop, build a house, buy a block of land, build a house, sell it, buy another block of land, and then not work for a period of time until the money would dwindle away, and then he'd only have enough left to actually build another house. So he'd go and build that house, sell it, buy a block of land, and that was his thing. He used to churn these, one house at a time type of things. Money wasn't his big focus. His big focus was the family, to spend time with the kids, my dad and my uncle, and he was a church person, so that was his world. My father started as a civil engineer, had a career in civil construction and mining, civil construction, the mining industry as well. Then he subsequently turned into a developer himself. His sort of specialty, if you like, was joint ventures. He did a lot of joint venture development in his later life. And of course, I grew up with all that in the background. And, before we had the social media and things like that, dinner parties was how business sort of happened. And, telephone calls, and people would ring at home. And, as a kid, I'd pick up the phone and I'd talk to one of Dad's business associates. And, because they might have met me at a dinner, they knew I wasn't a stupid kid. I was always a kid, but they knew that they could have a little chat to me about stuff. And over particularly in my teenage years, is where I sort of really, I now look back and, mate, I absorbed so much about business, through osmosis, just by being there, being forced to sit at the table. That every kid's nightmare. You have to sit at the table while all the adults are talking, and you're sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is so boring." The thing is, you're learning so much. Anyway, so it got to the point where, in school, I'd made the decision I was going to be a civil engineer. I was doing 3-unit maths, physics, chemistry, all that engineering stuff. Except I had a problem. I had a problem in myself, and that was my mouth was far too quick for my brain. And ultimately, I got kicked out of school in year 11 for being an absolute smartass. So I got turfed, and I was left there at the end of year 11 going, I wonder what I'm going to do now. And, I was sitting at home, by the pool. Dad came home one day and said, mate, I'm not having you sitting at home doing nothing, right, enjoying the fruits of my labour when you got kicked out of school. Go get a job, right? And I said, yeah, the school holidays are coming. We'll leave it for a couple of months. And he's going, no, you're not freeloading off me. And he actually talked to a business owner who said, we're looking for an apprentice carpenter. So when
do you still see that from your network, that there is those sort of risk-taking individuals that are doing well in that space, Steve?
I think that the younger generation has an expectation that things are just going to happen for them. They're entitled to. One of the things you mentioned before is talking to someone who's been in the industry for 4 years, who's looking for a role that you've got to be around for 20 years for. Something like that. I think that generation has those expectations of seniority without earning it, and with that in mind, it makes it very hard for them. And from that perspective, they look at us older generation and go, you guys are too harsh. You're unrealistic, and we're seeing the same thing. But tell me an older generation that thinks the younger generation is better than their generation, and it's never happened. Every generation's different. So I just look at it and go, look, affordability, and this is a really interesting thing as well. When you look at that apartment that I talked about, so I bought that in 1985 or six, and someone's going to be sitting there doing the maths, working out how old I am now, right? So, I bought that unit then. My future son-in-law bought an apartment in the same suburb, basically the same apartment sort of thing. But what I look at, when you look at the price of what I paid and what he paid, and then you look at my income at that time and his income at the time that he bought his unit, for me, it was less than 2 times my annual income, the price of the unit. For the future son-in-law, it was 6 times. And this is the affordability side of things. And when we look at affordability, my era was affordable. Current, when it's 6 times instead of 2 times, that tells you, you need 6 times the income. So, couples, so with my daughter, the two of them are going to be able to, it's then 3 times their own income each to acquire it. And that's massive debt. And for people who want to get into property development, through, hey, let me buy, renovate and sell an apartment, we as developers and even in, as builders, we are in the solutions business, right? What's the problem? What's the solution? And as a developer, people just come to me, oh, I haven't got the money. I haven't got the money to be a developer. Okay, that's the problem. What's the solution? What do you need to solve that? Well, I need money. There you go. You've got the solution. Find it. Who's got money that they can give it to you? To do stuff. Well, the family is the first place to start. Friends is next, and then investors. So whatever your problem is, just find a solution. And this is where entrepreneurs come to the fore. They don't go, I haven't got the money. The entrepreneur says, I have this problem. What is the solution? And they'll go looking for that solution. And when you get started, it's really hard to get money because you've got no experience in doing what you're doing. But, if you're Gen Z, well, talk to all your Gen Z mates because a lot of them are going to be in the same boat. Well, why don't you pool what you've got? Pool the resources you've got and start small. Buy, renovate, sell an apartment is where I say to everybody, start there because the learnings that you'll get out of the bottom end of property development, that first step, the learnings that you get from that, if you set a time frame for your project, set your budgets, identify the scope of work that you have to do, you create your feasibility study, and then you actually go and do it, you'll find out very, very quickly that you had no idea of what the real time frame was. You had no idea of what the difficulties would be in achieving that renovation. You had no idea that you stuffed up the pricing, and you didn't realise that you had to allow for the sales and marketing and settlement period at the end as well. So all these things, it's learning, and better to do that at an entry level dollar value than learning all that doing a 6-pack of townhouses somewhere.
Who are your typical sort of clients, or that are maybe the typical, I guess, profile of those who would be engaged with the Property Development Institute, Steve?
Oh wow, that's mate. Everybody, it's fascinating. There's no set, existing career that appears more often than others. Now, I've got if I talk about people in my mentoring program that I've had over the years, I've had a guy who was in sales and marketing for a multinational corporation. I had a guy who's an air conditioning refrigeration mechanic, police officer, real estate agent, a telecommunications owner of a business in telecommunications. Oh, gee, a guy who owned retail, cafes and restaurants. Um, Gosh, a guy who was pretty high up in a corporate role in a IT company. It
Endless.
is varied, right? But what I don't see a hell of a lot of, which is really interesting, are people in the development in the building industry. Like there's a few builders that come through that are looking to improve their knowledge so they can move across into being a builder developer, but never leaving building. And occasionally I get development managers who are actually in the industry who, whilst they know what development's about, stepping out of that corporate environment and doing it yourself is horrifying to them because all the money is already there, the systems, procedures, everything's over there, and they've got, in a corporate environment, you've got process and procedures, and you're surrounded by it, you're encapsulated. But as soon as you come outside of that, that's gone. So there's no constraints. And a lot of us actually need those constraints to feel safe because when you leave employment, it's all up to you. I mean, when I started my consultancy business in 2006, I started with no clients lined up, absolutely zero. And it was very interesting. At one of the lunches that I had with a group of people before I left, one of the people there was a business owner in a project management company that was project managing something that I was working on. And he said, "Mate, Steve, fantastic, good on you for having a go, but I will tell you this: every person, 100%, everybody who said that they would help you will not do anything for you. You will get zero help from them. Do not rely on them." And you know what? He was 100% right. And the only person that actually helped me was a curveball. It was a former client's project manager who I hadn't particularly got along with too well, right? But he came to me when he found out that I'd finished up my company. I've finished employment and started my company, and asked me to start a business with him. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? And then he then recommended me to a mutual client. So and that became my first client. But it was just fascinating, absolutely fascinating how everybody says to you, well, we'll send you this work, we'll send you that work, and mate, no one does. No one ever does. You've got to do it by yourself. But we need, coming back to that, in a corporate environment, you've got structure. And as soon as you come out of it, there is no structure. You're your own boss. You make your own decisions. If you're technically, if you're a technician, which I was technically competent. I thought, oh, look, I've got all this competency. I can share it with, all these people, and they're all going to appreciate my service. That was fantastic. The only problem is, how do you get those people to engage you? How do you find them? All that sort of stuff. No one tells you about that. That is the scary bit. You just don't understand how important.
Welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, the go-to construction podcast for construction professionals seeking inspiration, education, or motivation for the next steps in their career. Each Monday, you'll be joined by me, Mick Donaghy, Managing Director of Gedden Executive Recruitment, and a respected name from the industry. A construction leader, a business owner, or someone in the thick of the action. The whole premise of this podcast is for you to get something from it. An idea, a connection, a mentor, whatever it is. I hope you get it, and I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Oh, mate, I had, a really good understanding of what development really was. Never understood that, in the 20 years, my wife and I had done a number of, projects, development projects, but we'd never seen them as development projects. They were only using my building skills. So, got into development, loved it, worked for publicly listed developer. Ultimately, the last 3 years of my employment history was actually working for Lang Walker, and that guy was absolutely amazing. May he rest in peace. He was just a phenomenal guy. And then started my own business in 2006, and my own development projects since then as well. So yeah, very interesting. You mentioned books and university and stuff. A lot of people sort of start to write books and never do. And it was funny, in 2011 I had the biggest year of my life, financially working and making a heap of money, and everything was really, really great, but I was absolutely miserable. And my wife said to me, you got to dig yourself out of this hole you're in. And she convinced me to go and attend this 3-day conference, which was called back then, this is 2011, it was called the National Achievers Conference, right? And a corny name, and I've just got, nah. But there are a couple of things that got my attention. One is that Tony Robbins was going to be there, Robert Kiyosaki, and everybody's favourite man, Donald Trump.
Wow.
So, and I've gone, I'd like to see Tony Robbins and Robert Kiyosaki live, but I was fascinated by Trump because back then he was just giving it to China, absolutely, massively. And I thought, okay, look, I want to see this guy. So I went and did this course, took 3 days off work, which I couldn't afford to do, but I went and did it. But what was really interesting about that course, apart from those 3 guys being quite fascinating, was it was just a sales pitch for all these different people, how they make money out of training. But what it did is open my eyes to, mate, there's so many different ways you can make money out there in business. It's just phenomenal. I mean, when you sit here and we're doing a podcast now, we're on a computer. How many businesses actually contributed components to the computers that we're on? The microphones, the recording equipment, all this sort of stuff. I never thought about the businesses that were behind the businesses that have to happen, how it all works. And it got my mind ticking about how to make money, to really make some money. And what business was all about is, finding that niche for that product that everyone needs. Anyway, so I moved on from that and started writing a book. It inspired me I'd started a book 3 years beforehand that I was scared to get it out there. One of these courses that I did, a personal development course I went to, they said, mate, what's wrong with you? Why don't you finish your book? And it's really simple, and it's such a simple thing. Why we don't finish books, why we don't publish books, why we sit on social media and don't, put posts out and things like that, is because we're scared of criticism. And I tell you, you want to find out whether or not you got some big kahunas, put a book out there or put a post out in social media that will not be popular.
Yeah.
That's when you test your mettle, because to be able to take criticism is an incredible capability, an incredible skill. So, I've written a number of books, and to stand up in front of a room to do training and to lecture people at university, that's a whole nother level, because to survive training, standing up in front of people and speaking and allowing people to ask you questions, you have to know your content.
Yep.
If you don't know your subject matter, you're going to get wiped on the floor. So anyway, I've done all that stuff, and I challenged myself. I was a profiled introvert previously. That certainly wouldn't be coming out right now. But yeah, I've had a lot of work to do to get rid of that. But notwithstanding, the beginning of where we started a few minutes ago, I had the nerves like everybody else does. You get nervous, but I'm just grateful that I've now got an ability to push through that and have my say, as it were.
What I love about that description, Steve, is that you started off as a kid, getting kicked out of school, and there's this evolution, and it sounds like it goes from just getting a job, and then it goes, okay, this is something I'm interested in. I'm actually I'm rising through the ranks. I'm enjoying this, and I'm growing and growing. But then there's a point in your career where you sort of say, actually, there's more as well. So there's the construction side, and then it's like then there's the property side comes in, but then at that point it sounds like it's like the entrepreneur, the business person comes in play. So it's like nearly like there's three stages of this career, and that's what I actually really really like that depiction, because I'm in the recruitment industry, and I'm sort of advising people on their careers all the time. And just yesterday I was speaking to a young person within the industry who's only been in the industry 4 years, but they're wanting to get to the position you would expect to be in maybe in like 20 years time,
Yep.
but they want that now. And I'm saying you've got a long career. Don't there's going to be lots of segues. There's going to be lots of nearly like a snakes and ladders throughout your career. So can you maybe just describe to me, once you've went through this sort of construction evolution, what skills did you have at that point that were really useful for you in development management?
Yeah. Okay. Look, I don't care what career you have. If you can't manage people, you're in trouble. You know, people are the biggest resource, and you know, people can be absolutely horrible. I was running a training course a couple of weekends ago, and I made the statement: people are horrible. People really are horrible. And when you think about, in property development, in building, whatever it is that your business is or that you do as a career, you know, people are getting married, they're getting divorced, they're having children, they lose a loved one, there's always, they get ill, someone passes away in the family. There's so many things that happen all the time, which is all part of life. It's horrible when it happens. It's worse when it happens to you or a family member, all this sort of stuff. But the thing is that everybody out there is experiencing something, and nobody's giving 100% all the time.
Yeah.
And when we're a manager of whatever the process is, our greatest challenge is getting the best out of everybody all the time. And that best may not be 100%. So someone may only be able to give you their best, and that might be 60% of what they've done before. But you've got to get the best out, because what they're going through at that time is only going to be for a period of time. I mean, if they, plummet and can't get out of it, then you've got to choose one of two things. You either replace them, or you fully support them, but understanding it, depending on what that support is and what it looks like, you can be detrimentally affecting yourself as well, and you can't help others unless you are okay yourself. So to me, the thing that I've sort of learned, if you go back to my father's start of his career in the civil engineering side of things, I was born in central Queensland, and I was there for just over a year. And then we went down to the Snowy Mountains scheme, and spent another year and a half, 2 years down in the Snowy Mountains. Then we came back to Sydney. Then we went to New Guinea. Then we went to outback Western Australia. Then we went to the south coast of New South Wales. And then we came back to Sydney. And then, bless them, my parents sent me off to boarding school in Bathurst. Thanks guys, really appreciate it. Right?
Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff. You look at all that. I chopped and changed and went everywhere in my younger years, and it actually took my wife to notice. But I have an ability to connect with people very quickly. I have a particular way that I do that, and I did that. I learnt that because when you move around all the time, you got to make friends quickly. And I learned to try to connect with people to find out who I could be a friend with, as soon as I started a new school. So, I was out there trying to connect with people. And, my wife actually said to me, it was in my sort of early 30s, she said, "You've got this incredible skill to connect with new people really, really quick, right? And then she said to me, but you've also got a counter skill, and that is that you've got this ability to cut people off quickly
Mm.
because, the pain of leaving your besties and moving on, because back then, no social media, you can't keep in contact. The only thing you can do is send a letter, you know. But in New Guinea, some of my best friends were the natives, the native kids. Mate, they had no telephones. They had no post box, no letters. That was it. Once you left there, that was gone. So she said, you've got this skill to actually be brutal and be able to chop someone off and move on with your life. And it's a skill and it's also a hindrance in that when I give people a lot of rope, but I also don't tolerate. So I am a little bit intolerant. So these things you find out about yourself as you grow. You've got these attributes and these constraints to your career, and the older you get, the more you realise about these things, and then you hit your 40 odd mark and you have your midlife crisis. And for us men, I think we all go through it. We all go through, am I doing what I want to do? Um, you know, I'd I'd moved from my construction career, which I thought was going to be my life, into development, and then after only 6 years as a development manager being employed, I've
Mm.
gone, mate. I've got a heap of knowledge to add to multiple clients. I'm going to go out there and have a go, and did it. I just made that decision at the age, I think, I don't know, what was I, 42, I think. Um, I've just gone, mate, this is it. I convinced a woman who was a career woman who'd given it all up, right? She'd given up her career to look after our three kids. I convinced her that we should sell our house, that we should take that money and put, some of it aside for my first year in my business as my income, and the balance can go into a project. And mate, she actually supported me in doing that. And, wow,
I think
massive.
100%. I think I was speaking to someone recently about this, that the person that you choose to spend your life with is the biggest decision you'll ever make in your life, because there's so many different aspects to it. And you mentioned off camera, you've been married for 38 years, and congratulations. But in terms of that, Steve, so you talk about the development side, and the reason I sort of going back to that is because there's so many, I would call them sort of like 20 something, nearly like the millennials, that look at the development industry, and they might see some of these shows on Netflix or YouTube, and it's the glitz and glam, it's the best of the best that they're seeing, and quite a lot of those in that area want to get into the development industry. Um, can you explain what the industry's like on from a real from a reality? Is it the glitz and glam? Is it this sort of walking around in a three-piece suit with a team working behind you, and you're just making profit after profit after profit, or what's the reality?
Okay, all right. So there's two aspects. I'll let you clarify for me. Do you want me to talk along the lines of someone who's a development manager working within the corporate environment, or do you want to talk about the entrepreneur who is the developer putting their capital at risk? Which would you prefer?
The entrepreneur, because I eventually think that's what most people want to get into. They might want to go from contract admin to project management to development management, then into property development. So I'm interested in that sort of property development piece.
Okay, yeah. So what I train in the institute is individuals who want to be property developers, and one of the sort of the hardest things to do, and this was difficult for me because I was a builder. One of the things that we do as developers that's significantly different to a lot of careers, and that is that we've got to forget about the detail and focus on the big picture. Because if you look at a project, so my world is sort of 30 plus units. That's what I like to develop. So that means any capital that goes in is in there for 3 to 4 years, depending on what the project is. Right? But if you're going to put some money in today and payday's not for 4 years, right? That's a long time. And for me to make the decision to put millions of dollars worth of capital, whether it's my own capital or investors, right, money, into a project that's locked up for that period of time, you want to be damn sure you know what's going to happen over the next 4 years. And for the things that you can control, that you come up with, risk identification and risk mitigation strategies. And for the things that you cannot control, that you've got adequate allowance in your feasibility study for the unknown. Now, when you look at that in 4 years' time, and I like to say to people, well, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? And you jump online, you have a look, and the forecast says it's going to be fine and 30 degrees. Great, okay. What's the weather going to be like a year from tomorrow? On that particular day. And it's like, well, how the hell would I know? And there you go. And yet you're going to put capital into a project that's going to be 4 years down the road. You have no idea what's going to happen. And you look at things that can affect us right now, and just to sort of give people the big picture things that we've got to think about. The US elections, what's happening for presidential elections in the US? What's going to happen if this side wins or that side wins? What does it mean for the global economy? What does it mean for Australia? What's going to happen to Australia if either one of those two people win that election? The Middle East. What's happening in the Middle East? What does that mean? What's the potential for a massive conflict over there? And if it happens, what does it mean for us over here? Ukraine. What's happening with Ukraine? Ukraine's sort of disappeared into the background because of the Middle East, but Ukraine's still going. What does that mean in the longer term? Is there an impact in there? England's going through a massive turmoil at the moment, with new ideas being thrashed out. What does that mean? And when you look globally at the massive debt that's been generated out of the pandemic, and governments everywhere have got these huge debts, and states in Australia, like Victoria, for example, with like enormous debt. What does that mean for all of us? Then you bring other things like immigration. We didn't have any immigration during the pandemic, right? But we opened the floodgates post-pandemic, and we've let hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people into Australia. We've got a housing crisis, and how does all this stuff work? What does it all mean? And here we are, I'm right at the bottom end of it. I'm a little guy in this. I can't control any of that. All I can do is be aware of it and form a view as to what it means. And then when I form that view, I can make an investment decision or not. Now, if all of that scares me, then I'll just be an employee. But if I go, mate, that's exciting to actually have to contemplate all of this, then, that's when you want to be an entrepreneur. That's when you want to be a developer, because we lock up our capital for a long time to make what everyone calls the big money. And mind you, the big money doesn't always happen.
Did you always have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, Steve, or where did that come from?
I think, look, I was always willing to give it a go. I was always willing to make money, and to make money to take risk. I bought my first property when I was 21, and renovate it and sold it, and made more than a year's salary out of my first project. But you look at that and you just go, is that being stupid? Is that being entrepreneurial, or is that wanting to get ahead? Call it what you want. I've always wanted to make money, and I think that's that's the thing, like, why did I want to make money? Well, I wanted to provide for my family. That was my thing. I wanted to have a good lifestyle. I wanted, I always wanted my wife to, be at home with the kids. I wanted to be able to afford for her to be there to raise the children, and she was minded that way as well. So, she had her career up until, the kids came along, and then, she made that decision. But I'd always said I would be supportive if she was at home with the kids, because my view and my wife's view was that, she's best placed to look after them, and she didn't want others to raise her children. So, I needed to create the environment where we had enough money to do all that. And, so that sort of drove those decision-making processes.
You mentioned there about buying your first house at 21, renovating it and selling it. Now, the thoughts of, the Gen Z, the millennials, I see less and less of that. Obviously, it's a bit, it's, harder and harder maybe to get on the property ladder. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of different sort of nuances involved. But do you find that Gen Z, the millennials are more risk adverse, or do you... Right, guys, so I'm absolutely pumped to say the Takeoff podcast is proud to be sponsored by RIB Software, the company behind some of the leading estimating software in the entire planet, including Costex, Candy, CX, and more. So firstly, if you didn't know, RIB are a powerhouse at providing innovative software solutions to the construction and engineering markets. They have over 500,000 users globally, are known universally as a solution provider for your entire project lifecycle, from planning to construction and beyond. RIB solutions help to ultimately connect people, processes, and data, so your project comes within budget, on time, and to the quality desired, all whilst reducing your business's carbon footprint. All this stuff matters, and RIB has the solutions. So if you're interested in finding out more, get on over to rib-software.com, reach out to your local team and quote Takeoff Podcast. For every listener who buys a subscription of RIB Costex, they will provide one free online training course. Okay, guys, back to the episode.
The sales and marketing side, bringing those customers in, actually is. Because you can be the best at what you do, technically, but if you can't go out there and pound the pavement and talk to people and convince them to use your services, you will never have a business.
It's so interesting you say that. It's like, you get this, starting your own business. I've done it a couple of times now. You get this real sort of energy and enthusiasm. You start it, and then, I don't know what it is, like 2 weeks, a month, 2 months in, it's just crickets. It's like, and that's when you start to really go, okay, this is it, and you've got to get going. Obviously the market's changed a lot over the last sort of probably 18 months, Steve. What are you seeing out there from a development perspective, from a property perspective, within the industry right now?
The pandemic has really created massive problems in the development industry. I mean, you look at, we have a housing crisis, and regardless of the immigration that's happened, we've got a housing crisis, and that the housing crisis sort of is due to the pandemic, logistics, not being able to get products and stuff from overseas, and Australia, over the preceding 50 years has, destroyed our manufacturing industry, and everything is manufactured, virtually everything is manufactured offshore, and the businesses that are still here manufacturing, they're holding on by the skin of their teeth. They're not making, really good profits, etc. They're reliant on, just being, too expensive to import that product. So, it's only a matter of time, though, before someone makes it cheaper overseas and brings it in. But funnily enough, they tend to be the heavy items, bricks and, precast panels and stuff like that. It's heavy product. So the cartage cost is high. But that said, on a project currently importing bricks from Italy, but what's happened is that with us as developers, during the pandemic, I couldn't make anything stack up. I got business partners, people in the mentoring program that I run. They were all going, "Oh my God, Steve, why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work?" And I go, "Well, okay, let's look at it really simplistically. Interest rates went down to basically zero, so there was free money. So what do people do when interest rates are low? Oh, let's buy that big house whilst we can afford it, because we'll never get another chance like this again." So what do people do? They went out and started buying houses because the money was free, right? And what does that do? Demand drives the price of houses up. And because people are saying, "Oh, well, look, why would you buy an apartment or a townhouse when you can buy a house?" So house prices took off, apartment prices and townhouse prices didn't. So house prices, mate, we need houses because we need the land. So one of our inputs, an important input into our feasibility study, went through the roof. Construction costs. Cost of construction took off, incredibly. I know structural steel in 1 year went up like 35% or something of that nature. And that's only one of the inputs into a builder's price. So builders' prices took off through the roof. And so there's our biggest cost, which is construction cost. So our land cost went up and our construction cost went through the roof. Those two went up, but our revenue didn't. Our revenue, the apartment prices and the townhouse prices, stayed relatively stable. And that just meant, so when costs increase and revenue doesn't, your margin disappears, because that's the difference between the two. So our margin disappeared and we couldn't get anything to stack up. Now, as soon as that happened, no more housing. So pandemic finishes, floodgates open of immigration, and nowhere for anyone to live. Rents go through the roof. That the demand for housing, interest rates went up. So people have gone, "Oh, I'm not going to buy an investment property or something because the rates have gone up," and they've committed themselves at lower interest rate into the big house and their repayments. So people are struggling to, meet their repayments, and you just go, "Oh my God, this is scary," But people complain about the interest rates at the moment being 5 or 6%. When I bought my unit when I was 21, I was paying 19% interest. 19, And when I bought a house 2 years later, 14.5%. And that would, you just go, hang on, who's complaining about high interest rates? It was just phenomenal back then. Absolutely phenomenal.
Do you think that we could ever get there again, Steve, from an interest rate perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Yep. I mean, you look at what government is doing at the moment, and, like I did do a couple of years of an economics degree, but never finished it. But, fundamental economics is something that I understand. So when you look at government policies, for the last... Yeah, okay, let's wind the clock back in Australia. 2007, we had an election. The Liberal Party under John Howard lost to the ALP, the Labor Party under Kevin Rudd. We then had the global financial crisis, and we went from being in surplus, financially in surplus. The Australian government had no debt, and that was the beginning of the spiral. So as soon as the GFC hit, Kevin Rudd started spending money. Then we had Julia Gillard. Then we had Kevin Rudd. Then we had the Liberal Party. Zip. And now we're looking down the barrel of a $1 trillion debt in Australia. Now that's a and that's only at the federal government. I'm not talking about the massive debt that Victorian government has, Queensland government, New South, all the governments around Australia. They all have large debts. Victoria's is horrendously scary, but if you look at that across Australia, we've got a couple of $1 trillion worth of debt. How the hell are we ever going to pay that off? Our interest bill on that every year is like, 30, 40 billion dollars. Imagine if we didn't have that debt, what we could spend that money on. The NDIS, for example, is a $32 billion a year, black hole in the budget. You know, what why do we need all this debt? So government, and notwithstanding government knows we've got this debt, nobody is saying stop spending on our credit card.
Mm.
To me, until government across Australia, state and federal, start really looking at some really good fiscal management, then we're at a point where inflation could take off at any time, and if inflation takes off, interest rates go with them. So yeah, I can see high interest rates without too much trouble.
And how does that impact the industry as a whole then, Steve, from, you know, builders in the residential space, maybe property developers? Is that really sort of taping back productivity at the moment? There isn't really a continued sort of surge of development work, or what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so if you look at what's been happening over the last few years, everything has been infrastructure projects. The vast majority of construction has been infrastructure. So what's happening with all those infrastructure projects now? They're coming to an end. And when they come to an end, what's going to happen? You're going to have mass unemployment unless all of the people who are working in those infrastructure projects can get new jobs somewhere else in some sort of construction sector. Now, the building industry, so that's the civil construction. You come to building, building buildings and apartments. It's really hard to make a project stack up, and you can tell that the number of approvals, for DAs being approved has plummeted. So developers aren't pressing ahead with projects. Now, if there's no projects coming, and you think about it this way, Lang Walker said this to me, at one stage. He said to me, "Never forget that we are at the top of the tree. You know, if we don't risk our capital, nobody has a job. No architects, no engineers, no builders, no nothing. Nobody has a job unless we're willing to risk our capital. Never forget that." And he's right. From a development perspective, if I don't go out there and create the project, nobody's got a job. And if there are 1,000 of me who aren't going out there, how many jobs are being lost? So the industry needs developers to actually risk their capital to give everybody that future role. So with infrastructure dying off now, so there's going to be this flood of people back into the industry, into the general building industry. You've got commercial office. The value of those assets is plummeting because of the pandemic. People working from home, etc. So that's sliding. No one's going to be building any more commercial office for a while until all of the vacancy gets soaked up, and then it'll start again. Residential, there's massive demand for it. However, we can't make it stack up. And notwithstanding that, the federal government wants to, build 1 million homes over 5 years, starting over a year ago. None of that's been done. It's just we struggle. Even in our, I think during the boom of Chinese money in Australia, sort of 2015, 2017. I think we only got to delivering something like 240, 250,000 dwellings in a year. And that was at peak. We didn't have the infrastructure projects, but that was at our peak, when there was massive demand for the product from Chinese. Now we've got massive demand in Australia, but the pricing is completely different. It's really difficult for us to find a project that will reward us enough for us to risk our capital. And that means no projects.
Do you see any sort of interesting opportunities in the space, Steve? Whether that's more like regional areas, whether that's as you mentioned, even the younger generation coming together and pulling their capital together to invest. Like, do you see interesting opportunities out there that maybe people like myself or others in the industry that might have a bit of expendable income that they can utilize to invest in the future?
Yeah, I do. But, again, as a developer, what we've got to be really careful of is when you get out of your own backyard and into a different market. So, for example, going halfway between Brisbane and Sydney up the coast there, if you go somewhere in the middle of the state, a regional centre, you'll be really careful because you don't know that market.
Mm.
There are nuances in every market, regardless if you go from Sydney to Melbourne or Melbourne to Brisbane, whatever, there's nuances. The markets are different and they operate differently and they treat new players in that market differently. So if I, go up to, I don't know, Port Macquarie, and up in the north of New South Wales. If I go to Port Macquarie, if I go ahead with a project and then I want to try and get a builder on board. Now, all of those local builders know each other, and I don't know any of them. I have no relationship built up over time. I'm this Sydney person coming into their market, right? Am I actually going to get a competitive price? I don't know. Probably not. Am I going to get competitive terms and conditions? Again, I don't know. The cost of construction, I do know, is going to be more expensive than in Sydney because there's less competition, and regionally, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to build. So whenever I look at regional areas to develop, I will not look there to develop using conventional construction. I only look at that from a perspective of using modular. So pre-finished boxes made in Sydney or Brisbane or wherever, and just carted up there on the back of a truck and just put the Meccano set together and it's done. So I even look at taking my own builders up, so a builder, an earthworks contractor, an electrician and a plumber to go and do all of the site works, the initial works, and then have the electricians and plumbers do the final connections at the back end. So I try to avoid using the local businesses because they just support each other, and we're a ring-in, we're a one-off. So yeah, look, you can do it, but you've got to be really aware that when you go into those markets, that you are a fish out of water.
Sort of looking at this from a bird's eye picture, obviously you've had a really sustained career within construction and property and development, Steve. It sounds like it's been really rewarding for you. Obviously, times now are challenging, and that's just the makeup of industry. There's good, there's bad, there's indifferent. We're going through a pretty challenging time at the moment. But what would you say? A bit of advice for those maybe wanting to get into the industry. What sort of advice would you have for them?
For someone getting into the development industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, have a go.
Have a crack.
Have a go.
Yeah.
It's if you're a builder and you think you might do okay as a developer, go and have a go. And the beauty of it is with particularly people who are in building who go into development, if you don't like it or it doesn't work out, go back to building. And that experience, whether you're out for 1, 2 or 3 years, the experience that you get as a developer is going to make you a much better builder because you will understand the developer's problems. And if you can do that, your ability to sell your services to a developer goes through the roof because you understand, you get it. And you can talk their language and you can talk about their risk and, how you, with your experience, can say, mate, I get it, and this is what I'm going to do to help you for you to make your margin. And that's, if a builder talks to me on the basis that they understand, my issues, my problems and how they can help resolve them, then, who am I going to work with? Someone who understands what my problems are. So have a go. Just have a go. That's all I would say.
I think that's like the real Australian attitude. It's like have a crack. That's maybe one thing that I've taken from working in Australia. It's that sort of can do attitude, and just sort of finalizing and sort of looking at the future. Obviously, challenging time at the moment, Steve. But what's exciting you about the future within the construction and property space? What are you looking forward to?
I just see there's innovation that's happening all the time, and something's going to crack. When you have pressure, when there's pressure on something, something will crack. It's like an egg. You put enough pressure on an egg, it's going to crack. All right, and when you put pressure on things, people innovate. People come up with, there's got to be a better way. Surely we can do that. Why won't this stack up? What if this? What if that? All you need is pressure to build to an extent where someone goes, well, what if we do this? And I'll give you a sort of an example of I'm always like last night I'm at a video conference with a gentleman in Qatar, and he's a Canadian gentleman who's in real estate, property, investment, development, and sales and marketing, all that sort of stuff. So he's a real property player. And we were just talking about what happens in different markets, how different markets, operate in the development world. And I'm always looking for what other people are doing elsewhere, because if I can get something out of that conversation last night, my head's spinning with thoughts about that conversation I had last night, because there are things that I reckon that are happening overseas that I could use over here to, my benefit and our industry's benefit. So, just talking to people enables you to sort of see opportunities. Now, in that, they may be able to become an investor or introduce us to someone, or you never know where a conversation will go. And I like to talk to people outside of my market, because every market is different. It might be similar. We're all developers, but if I talk to someone, a developer in another country, and we talk about what our issues are, they will tell me something that they've got a problem with over there, and I'll go, oh, well, this is what we do, and they go, oh, that's interesting, and vice versa. So I think diversification of knowledge brings us in. Pressure will make us innovate, and I'm looking forward to what's coming. I'm a firm believer that modular forms of construction are an absolute no-brainer for our industry moving forward. It's going to solve a lot of the quality problems and speed and the speed of getting housing into the market, those type of things. I think modular is definitely the way of the future. Just in Australia, our biggest problem is we don't have volume. Mm. Modular needs volume to be cost effective. Yeah. And if we don't have that, then conventional forms of construction are going to be the way that continues to happen. I would love to use modular on everything that I do, but it's just not viable to do so. It's tough.
I've loved this chat today, Steve. It's been really, really interesting. I've taken a lot of value from it. If there's anyone out there that's maybe interested in what you're doing at Lefta or what you're doing within the Property Institute, what's the best way to get in contact with you, Steve?
Look, tell them to just jump. Well, if you're listening, jump onto propertydevelopmentinstitute.com. And there's a link. You can book a meeting with me, an online link to book a meeting, and or drop me an email. The email's developer@propertydevelopmentinstitute.com. Phone numbers on the website as well. So just give us a bell whether you want to talk to me about career or something like that. I am absolutely open to help anyone who's interested in property development. That's my love. I was a builder. I still love my building, and I've got to try and keep away from building sites because I stick my nose in too far into the detail, but no, look, development, if you want to have a career in development and you're not sure about how to go about it, look, feel free absolutely to contact me.
Awesome, Steve. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your story and a bit more about the industry. I've absolutely loved it. Thank you for being part of the Takeoff podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Mick.
Steve, before you go today, guys, I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. Can you please go to Apple right now or Spotify right now and just give us those 5 stars? Hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference you wouldn't believe. The whole idea of this show is to inspire, educate, and motivate our listeners. And we only do that if we're getting the best guests. The best guests want to see data. They want to see information. They want to see how many listeners that we get. And so all of this stuff is really, really important. So if you can just literally go and do that today, if you enjoy the show, just go and hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We're going to continue to push this out there every Monday. So if you can, hit that 5-star button. And if you can't, even share it with a friend. Go on to WhatsApp, flick it on to your crew. Guys, thank you so much for listening. On to next week.